the Kuali Ready webinar. This is Becky Higgins. I'm Kuali Ready's product manager, and I'm so glad you could join us today. Everyone will be on mute throughout the presentation. We will open Q&A. We will be open for Q&A at the end of the presentation, but please type your questions into the webinar panel as they come to you. We will get through as much content as we can during the time that we have. This webinar will be recorded, and a link to the recording will be shared with you. Feel free to share this link with colleagues who couldn't make it today. Before we begin, we would like to ask all participants a few questions using our polling feature. This will help the presenter learn more about the audience and cater the presentation to the attendees today. So here comes our first question. Which of these natural disasters do you feel is the biggest potential threat to your institution at this time? Five more seconds. Okay. So it appears that tornadoes and hurricanes are at the top of our list. Great. That's going to help Lauren. Let's move on to our next question. How prepared do you feel your institution is for a natural disaster? Five more seconds. Okay, this is fantastic news. I'm so glad we feel confident. The attendees today are feeling confident. Okay, there's one more question left. What resources do you have at your institution for preparing for natural disasters? Select all that apply. Five more seconds. All right, lots of different things here. Thank you so much for participating in our poll. This will help Lauren get a little more insight into the attendees today. Okay, so without further ado, I'm so pleased to introduce our presenter for today, Lauren Mink of East Carolina University. Lauren graduated from the University of North Carolina at Asheville with a degree in meteorology and has 6 years of emergency management experience. She has been with ECU for 4 of those years, serving as the continuity and emergency planner. Lauren is responsible for business continuity planning, maintaining the emergency notification system, emergency operations planning, hazardous weather response planning, testing, training, exercises, and even more. In regards to hazardous weather events, Lauren has assisted ECU through 25 plus events or near misses. So I'm so excited to have Lauren here today, and I'm going to hand that over to her.
Great, thanks, Becky. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having me today. To start, I wanted to give a little bit of a background information before I get into Hurricane Matthew and how continuity planning has helped ECU to recover. So to do that, I thought I'd give a campus profile, a look at what our campus looks like, and our vulnerability to tropical systems. So ECU is located in the North Central Coastal Plain region of North Carolina, which is east of I-95, highlighted in this red area. The star is Raleigh. We are about 87 miles from the Atlantic Ocean, and our 3 campuses reside in Pitt County, which is here in yellow. Pitt County has a population of approximately 191,000, and our university is located in the county seat of the city of Greenville, which has a population of about 85,000. As far as natural features for the county, we have Tar River that runs through the center of the county as well as through the city of Greenville, and we have Grain Mills Run that runs through campus. Closer look at our campus, we have a total enrollment of just under 29,000, and about 25% of those are online students. As you see, the majority of our students are from North Carolina, and half of them are actually from eastern North Carolina, or as I said before, east of I-95. We have approximately 5,800 faculty and staff members and 5,900 on-campus residents who live in our residence halls. So taking a look at our disaster mitigation plan, last updated in 2013, you can see that ECU's vulnerability to tropical storms is fairly high. According to a study in 2010, the NOAA National Weather Service said that Greenville is about 33 to 36% likely to see a tropical storm or hurricane on an annual basis. So it's very likely that we'll see a tropical storm or hurricane within any given year, and the range of impact for our area is very large. From past events, numerous studies, our level of impact is estimated to be limited. You can see that definition of limited on your screen. You can also see in the graphic that I've provided that the return period for a North Carolina coastline landfalling hurricane is every 5 to 7 years, and obviously more frequently for tropical storms and depressions. So I mentioned past events, and I wanted to touch on that for just a minute or two. Here I have a graphic of eastern North Carolina. I have a 100-mile radius circle that's centered around Greenville, North Carolina. So for the past 50 years, from 1966 to 2016, we've had approximately 42 tropical systems to pass within a 100-mile radius of Greenville, North Carolina. It's interesting to note that Hurricane Matthew is not included in this graphic. Hurricane Matthew's center was 110 miles away from Greenville. So if you could imagine that I expanded this radius out to 110, 115, the number of tropical systems to pass within that radius from Greenville would certainly increase. I chose a 100-mile radius because the average diameter of hurricane force winds is 100 miles, and the average diameter of tropical storm force winds is 300 to 400 miles. So you could imagine that even a tropical system that passes 200 miles offshore, Greenville may be impacted by outer bands, rain bands, or tropical storm force winds. So if you ask anybody in our area which hurricane or tropical storm they remember the most folks will tell you Dennis and Floyd. So Hurricane Dennis made a swipe at the North Carolina coast August 30th as a Category 2 storm. You'll see in the graphic, Dennis kind of went out to sea and did a little loopy-loop before making official landfall as a tropical storm, bringing 8 inches of rain to the Greenville area. Just a week later, Hurricane Floyd made landfall as a Category 2 and impacted our area with over 20 inches of rain. So from those 2 events, we saw unprecedented widespread flooding for eastern North Carolina. Our Tar River that runs through the city and county, as well as many tributaries in the area, were swollen. Our 100 and 500-year floodplains were inundated with water, and some rivers in our area, such as the Neuse River down in Kinston, saw the river rise as much as 23 feet. So with Dennis and Floyd, there were over 76 counties that sustained damages with over $6 billion done in damages and 52 deaths. In the city of Greenville alone, it was reported that $91 million in damages had occurred. ECU classes had been canceled leading up to Floyd. We did not evacuate campus, but we did encourage students to leave, to go inland with their friends, family, or roommates. Fortunately, with Floyd, the hurricane force winds did minimal damage. We had some roofs that suffered and a couple of older trees that were uprooted. In total, we had 26 inches of rainfall that fell within the month of Greenville. And just for comparison, our average annual rainfall is 42 inches. So over half of the annual rainfall fell within 1 month in 1999. So I mentioned Greenville Run is a creek that runs through campus. It massively overflowed its banks and crossed a major thoroughfare on campus, entered basement mechanical rooms of several buildings, flooded active steam tunnels. Parking lots and low-lying areas were underwater. We had sewage lines that were backed up and polluted the flooded waters. And this caused over $3 million of damage on campus alone. We had residence halls that went dark for 36 hours. And at the time, we had about 5,000 students living on campus. Power had to be manually cut, so this is pretty interesting. We have some substations around Greenville, and we actually have one on campus. And floodwaters rose quickly enough and surrounded those substations. So in order to keep the power from arcing off the substation onto the water, power had to be manually cut so as not to damage our substations. Our water supply was also contaminated. So our utility services were fragile, sanitary conditions were deteriorating, and our food inventories were very limited. So we canceled classes for the following week, and students were encouraged to leave the area. So they kind of got an unexpected fall break, a week vacation from school, not too long after classes started. NC State University actually housed some of our students, and this helped to relieve the number of people on campus who required services, and this allowed our team to concentrate on recovery. There were a couple of students, international students, who had nowhere to go, so we had to consolidate those students into one residence hall. And we also housed the National Guard on campus that were helping in the recovery efforts in eastern North Carolina. Rivers and tributaries of Greenville, north of Greenville, emptied their excess waters into the rivers and tributaries, which flowed downstream. So eventually we saw the Tar River rise 17 feet above flood stage, meaning we had tons of students, faculty, and staff who were living in private homes and apartments along the river that were impacted, and some families were displaced. There were a few people who decided not to evacuate, and those folks had to be rescued. We had approximately 2,500 off-campus students that were displaced, and some of them lost everything they had, from books, clothing, computers, and even their cars. In some places, the Tar River was high enough to inundate second-story apartments, and the floodwaters remained high for over 2 weeks. And roads to and from campus were inaccessible for a number of days, which isolated the city and the university from outside assistance. We did happen to lose one student during Hurricane Floyd. The student was playing in Green Mill Run, the creek that runs through campus, on an inner tube, and was unfortunately entangled in debris and drowned. And his body wasn't recovered until a week after, when the floodwaters subsided. And another fun fact is a football game had to be rescheduled or moved to NC State, to their stadium. Unfortunately, we were victorious, so go Pirates. So obviously there were a ton of lessons learned from Floyd in many different aspects. The university, the city, the county, and many others have made upgrades and improvements over the time period since 1999. I wanted to quickly touch on some of these that helped in our response to Hurricane Matthew. So during the recovery, most folks think of mitigation projects. So ECU did employ resistance, absorption, and restoration efforts in and around campus, and I've listed these here. It wasn't too many years later that we started continuity planning. The university started continuity planning before Y2K, but departmental continuity plans weren't really documented until 2006. We also started to send the hurricane seasonal outlook in an email every year at the beginning of hurricane season, and we developed a hurricane preparedness checklist, which you'll see here on the left. So our checklist includes what to do at the start of hurricane season, which is quickly approaching, June 1st, and that includes what to do for your office, and then also how to prepare yourself at home. And then we have 3 phases. Phase 1 is days before you're expected to be impacted by a tropical storm, so 3 to 5 days out, what you should be doing to prepare, and then what decisions need to be made that far in advance. Phase 2 is whenever your hours from impact, so 12 to 48 hours. One thing special to note here is that we do have a wind policy on campus that when winds are sustained at 40 mile an hour or higher, all outdoor operations cease. This includes ECU police patrols, ECU transit, construction, anything that's outside shuts down as we get to 40 mile an hour sustained winds. So going into phase 3 is more of the recovery process after the storm's passed and after the winds have dissipated below that 40 mile an hour threshold, what should be done during that recovery phase. If you're interested in our hurricane checklist, that will be available at the end of today's webinar, so please stay tuned. ECU was also recognized as a Storm Ready university back in 2009. To be considered Storm Ready, the National Weather Service has provided different steps that they believe make a university or a community ready to handle a storm. So if you're interested in Storm Ready, please contact your National Weather Service office that's closest to you. You have to reapply for Storm Ready every 3 years, and we were last recognized in 2016. In 2013, I was hired with my meteorology background to assist with hazardous weather response planning, as well as developing a team to make decisions and improve our response to storm systems. And in 2016, our American Meteorological Society chapter on campus worked together with my office, the Office of Environmental Health and Safety, to become a Weather Ready Nation ambassador. What that means is that we promote and encourage, through public outreach, a change in communities, so our ECU community, to become more resilient to hazardous weather. And then finally, through the years, we've had many exercises and we've experienced many real-life events that have led to fruitful after-action reports and improvement plans that have led to further mitigation efforts on campus. So now to the crux of our agenda today, our impacts from Hurricane Matthew. Matthew was very similar to Floyd in many aspects, that we had the immediate impacts of the hurricane, followed a week later by flooding of the Tar River. So it was really a 1-2 punch. And moving forward, I honestly think that anytime we have a hurricane, this is what we need to expect. We have the immediate impacts and then a secondary event close to a week later. So Hurricane Matthew, I will say that planning began on September 30th, partly because I love weather so much and I was so in tune with what's happening in the Atlantic Ocean. But also we started receiving information from the National Weather Service fairly early with Hurricane Matthew. It's important to note that the forecasts were incredibly fickle at the beginning of our notices from the National Weather Service. It seemed like every model run, the track of Matthew would change. Sometimes the morning model runs would show hurricane giving us a direct beeline for eastern North Carolina, whereas maybe the model in the afternoon run would actually show the track staying well offshore. So we really didn't know until Friday that we would be impacted. So I mentioned our checklist earlier. We initiated our checklist on Monday, October 3rd, and we started meeting with our hazardous weather response team on Tuesday, October 4th. We were fortunate in that we were working closely with the National Weather Service, the City of Greenville, Pitt County, our University of North Carolina system, and the North Carolina Emergency Management Agency. And this helped us with our forecasting abilities as the hurricane made landfall in October 4th as a Category 4 hurricane in Haiti and Cuba, and made its way up the coast from Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and finally to North Carolina. The official U.S. landfall was October 8th in South Carolina as a Category 1 with sustained winds of 75 miles an hour. The forecasted landfall early on was expected during our fall break. So I mentioned this before. Fall break for us runs Saturday through Tuesday. So a lot of our students were leaving town for fall break. Many had plans to go to the beach and had to change those plans, so folks went home. And there were rumors early on, I'm not sure if any of you remember, but the Weather Channel quickly assumed that Hurricane Matthew would be very much like Hurricane Floyd back in 1999, which kind of played to our favor because that kind of perked folks' attention. They started listening when they heard Floyd. It's interesting that folks live by experience. So we utilized our emergency notification system, ECU Alert, to disseminate information to our ECU community. We feel very strongly that this is very positive for our students as we were preparing our students to leave and prepare their homes before they did leave. So I mentioned on Friday, October 7th, the forecast started to become more and more concrete that we were going to be heavily impacted. The forecast for our area was for extreme heavy rainfall that would result in the potential for widespread flash flooding. And based on this update, Pitt County and the city of Greenville declared a state of emergency, and EOC was opened for the county, and at least 2 shelters were open for the general population. Again, we did not evacuate campus or cancel classes for that Friday. Since we were going into fall break, we encouraged students to leave a little earlier. Most students get Friday classes before a long break anyways, so I don't think they thought much more of that. We have ECU physicians, which are a couple of clinics on campus. We have about 40 clinics. We did close those over the weekend so that our patients wouldn't endanger themselves trying to get to their appointments. And our medical students have to participate in so many clinics per semester, and we did have to cancel the clinicals for the weekend. So Greenville, North Carolina was impacted on the evening of Saturday, October 8th, into the early morning of Sunday, October 9th. We had heavy rainfall, as predicted, that caused flash flooding and numerous road washouts throughout our county, including roads leading to and from campus. There were widespread power outages reported around the county, and a curfew was actually initiated for the county and the city of Greenville because it became so dangerous overnight. About 11 p.m. Saturday night, we got a call from Greenville Utilities, which is the utility company that provides the majority of power and water to the university, in regards to the substation that was on campus. I mentioned this earlier with Floyd. We had a couple of mitigation projects to protect that substation from future flooding, but during Matthew, floodwaters were nearing the supply. We got within 6 inches of the substation, and at 5 inches, they had planned to manually shut down the power. Thank goodness this didn't happen. We kind of leveled out after 11 p.m. Had we had to have shut that power down, we would have lost power to over 50% of our campus. So we were very fortunate not to have lost power. The damage assessments had to wait until daylight on Sunday due to the heavy rains, heavy or high winds, flooded highways, and the curfews that were listed for overnight. So Sunday morning, coming to campus, a couple of the reports we saw were we had one window that was reported to be broken from a tree down. 3 cars were abandoned in floodwaters on campus. Multiple trees were reported down. During Matthew, we lost over 120 trees on campus. There was a basement in one building that sustained flood damages. So one of the mitigation projects that was on an earlier slide were floodgates and door dams. It's unclear whether it was due to human error or if the seals in the floodgate had dry rotted over the years, but the floodgate failed and 12 inches of water inundated one of our mechanical rooms. Another building was severely damaged that lies just along Greenville Creek through campus. That building had 42 inches of floodwater inundation, and that water was contaminated, so most of the stuff in that building was unsalvageable. All over campus, we have reports of minor water leaks that had been reported due to wind-driven rain, and we were very fortunate in that we had no injuries reported during this time frame. Some areas of eastern North Carolina received upwards of 18 inches. For our area, we received anywhere between 8 and 10 inches, depending on where you were within the city of Greenville. And the highest wind gust we recorded was 59 miles an hour. And fortunately, this occurred overnight during the curfew, so there weren't too many folks out on the road or out and about to experience that wind gust. So Sunday morning, we were notified that the Tar River was expected to crest over 20 feet by the following weekend. I mentioned that the city and county had declared a state of emergency. The president declared a major disaster on October 10th for Pitt County and several other North Carolina counties. That declaration meant that individuals and households that were impacted by Hurricane Matthew could be assisted by federal funds. the FEMA Disaster Survivor Assistance Team was deployed to Pitt County in the weeks following Matthew. Residents were advised not to leave their homes during nighttime hours so as not to endanger themselves or the first responders. The curfew lasted from the point of impact on October 8th through October 15th, the day after our Tar River crested. The county opened additional shelters in response to the expected river flooding and the power outages. Our ECU Hazardous Weather Response Team met many times the following week to discuss the forthcoming flooding and impacts to campus. So as I mentioned, we were under fall break, meaning that Monday and Tuesday classes were canceled and student services on campus were shut down. Our team decided to cancel classes for the remainder of the week, mainly because students couldn't get to campus. We had many students calling saying that they were impacted at home, so they went back to Raleigh, they went to Fayetteville, they went back home to Wilmington or Virginia Beach, and they were unable to leave their driveway. And then we had some folks who were living in housing along the river, and they were unable to leave their home in order to make it just a few blocks to campus. And we were still expecting additional flooding, so we found it unsafe to ask students to try and make it to school. So we initiated an ECU call center because we did receive a couple of phone calls that were inundating our main campus line. So our call center was operational for over a week, in which we received over 1,700 calls. We had calls from students, faculty, and staff, as well as parents and patients, since we do have our clinic. We found it very helpful to establish a hashtag for social media, and our students used this hashtag to submit pictures of damage that had occurred in and around the area, as well as to ask questions to staff. So we had staff monitoring social media. If you'd like to take a look at some of those posts, our hashtag was hashtag ECU Matthew. There were also some concerns that some students or faculty staff members could be cut off from accessing campus due to the rivers rising so high that they were impacting our bridges. So you can see in this picture to the right here that we got fairly close to our rivers, our bridges, I should say. So north of the river, we have our ECU transit buses and vans staged on a normal basis. So in order to not be blocked off from those resources, we moved all of our buses and vans south of the river, which is where our university is located, in case we had to evacuate the students who remained on campus. In the days after, Tar River reached its third highest crest on record, just under 24.5 feet. So this is 12 feet above flood stage. And if you recall from earlier, during Floyd, we were 17 feet above flood stage. So we were about 5 feet under where Floyd levels were. But this still resulted in catastrophic flooding areas north and south of the river. So at 24 feet, when we start to see catastrophic flooding in our area, such as water inundating the Pitt-Greenville Airport runways and actually starting to enter the airport itself. Nearly all major roadways countywide became flooded or impassable during that 24 feet flood stage. And just like with Floyd, we did have a football game that was scheduled the week of the flooding, but fortunately we had a bye week in November and were able to postpone the game until November. At the height of the crest on Friday, October 14th, so again, a week later after the hurricane actually hit, there were approximately 70 roads closed due to high waters or road washouts throughout the county, many more across eastern North Carolina. So we opened a disaster recovery center for our students, faculty, and staff that were impacted. We had representation from campus living and dining, our bookstore, financial aid, parking and transportation, student health and counseling, our Dean of Students office, as well as the American Red Cross. Our campus living folks were able to house some of the students that were displaced. So 68 students who lived along the Tar River actually moved on campus temporarily. We were fortunate that one of our residence halls was down for maintenance during the fall semester. We also had one faculty staff member's family who was impacted and displaced from their home, and we housed them on campus temporarily. And then during the response to Hurricane Matthew for 1 to 2 weeks, we did house some campus police officers as well as the City of Greenville and Pitt County Sheriff officers on campus because they weren't able to go home. They weren't able to be with their families. 30 miles southwest of Greenville, we have the Neuse River in Kinston that I mentioned earlier. Kinston broke the record flooding of Floyd in 1999 with their river cresting at 28.3 feet. Coming back to campus, it took approximately 2 weeks for the campus to clean up. Flooding in North Carolina was estimated to have caused over $1.5 billion to homes, businesses, and government buildings. And this estimate does not account for the cost of repairing damaged roads and bridges or the value of belongings inside those damaged buildings. We had one fatality to occur in Pitt County, and that was from a person driving into floodwaters. 26 people in North Carolina died from the impacts left from Hurricane Matthew. And in the U.S., up and down the East Coast, we had a total of 49 deaths that were attributed to the storm. And then Hurricane Matthew in total ended up causing 1,000 deaths or more. It's still unsure based on Haiti, Cuba, and the Bahamas and how they were impacted. We had over 4,000 people that occupied shelters within Pitt County, and 680,000 people were without power, some for nearly a week in smaller towns. We had 2,300 people that were rescued either from their home or their cars. And you can see here in this image all the flooding that had occurred. River Drive, Warren Street, all of these houses in this area are all student living. This is a nursing home area here on Hickory Street, and then Beach Street was very badly flooded in that area as well. So due to an overwhelming number of calls, the city and county decided to have a volunteer resource coordinator position, and this person was responsible for linking volunteers or folks who wanted to volunteer their time, their money, their goods to community groups, churches, and other charitable organizations that were providing relief efforts, and not just in Pitt County. As I mentioned, there were many other areas in eastern North Carolina that were more impacted than ECU or Greenville was. And this is just zooming in on some of that student housing that was impacted along the river. So I wanted to share some lessons learned or areas of improvement that were noted after Matthew. I tried to make these non-ECU specific so that perhaps you can take these back to your university and have some conversations about what you need to do to better prepare. It's important that your faculty and staff understand your adverse weather and emergency closing policy, or whatever you call that at your campus. Our policy had recently changed, and our faculty and staff complained that we had poor messaging, both from human resources and their own supervisors as far as what was expected of them during adverse weather or emergency closing. Along the same lines, it's also important that your employees know what their expectations are. So whether they're deemed mandatory or non-mandatory, knowing what that means. We have faculty and staff on campus who were calling, asking if they were considered mandatory or not. They didn't know their status. They didn't know when or how they were supposed to report to work. They didn't know what was to happen if they couldn't make it in. Or some folks didn't have communication with their supervisors because they lost power. So I highly recommend letting your mandatory, non-mandatory employees know what's expected of them, and get them a plan before you leave for that hurricane emergency or before pandemic event or something. Just let them know what their expectations are. So both of these areas that I've mentioned are directly tied to communication, both internally and within departments. It wouldn't be an after-action report if communication wasn't a point of failure. So it's important to also mention our external and stakeholder communication. So most vendors that we use are local or regional, and they were also impacted by Hurricane Matthew. This delayed shipment of resources and technical assistance from flooded roadways and not being able to access our area. We did have a few stakeholders that are not located on the eastern coastline of the U.S. Maybe they're on the West Coast or not in the U.S. And they were unaware of our situation or somewhat non-empathetic of what was going on and our ability to respond. We also had to maintain constant lines of communication for our impacted students, faculty, and staff, as well as our patient and visitors and parents. Hurricane Matthew also struck during one of our fall open houses that impacted students from all over who had been accepted or were hoping to come to ECU, so we had to reschedule that. Of course, we had parents from New Jersey, California, Florida that were concerned for their baby girl or their baby boy. So we had to be very cognizant of how we were going to best take care of their kids while we had them. In regards to continuity planning, it's very important to have orders of succession and delegations of authority up to date. We found that some folks hadn't updated those in a few years. And then, of course, constant cross-training is necessary for faculty or staff. As I mentioned, we had roadways closed. Folks couldn't access campus, which eventually led to the closing of campus for a week. So I love giving this example. SOPs, standard operating procedures, are incredibly important to document critical functions or critical processes. I have one COOP department that loved my example of, if I were to walk out of this building right now and get hit by a bus, I would want someone to know what my processes are. So documenting those, what I do on a daily, weekly, even monthly or quarterly or annual basis, so that my projects and responsibilities don't fall behind. She loved that example so much that instead of SOPs, she's decided to call them their bus folders. So if someone was hit by a bus, they could grab that folder and their critical functions could continue. I love that, and I permanently want to change SOPs to bus folders from now on. And of course, I wanted to mention working very closely with your city and county partners. You've heard this if you're in emergency management, that it's not wise to be exchanging business cards on the scene of an emergency. So get to know your partners before an emergency happens, train with them, exercise with them, and then I can't speak highly enough of our National Weather Service partners. I highly recommend you reaching out to your local weather forecasting office to build relationships with those folks. So quickly, I wanted to talk about how Kuali Ready, or we call ECU Ready here on campus, has helped us prepare for a smoother recovery. Obviously, we love that ECU Ready was created by higher education for higher education. The Kuali system has provided us a way to manage and standardize continuity plans for university departments. Before Kuali Ready, we were using Word docs and Excel spreadsheets, and they were very difficult to maintain and update. We use the reporting features from Kuali Ready to further develop strategic and disaster recovery plans. And we love the new update that's coming out. A recommendation that's come from our internal auditors has been that we regularly test our continuity plans, our department plans. So each year we set aside 1 month for continuity testing. So our tests are created by my office, the Environmental Health and Safety Office, and we distribute that test through email. They're intended to be facilitated by the department during a regularly scheduled staff meeting. So each year, our office develops a self-guided scenario that focuses on a different topic of concern. So for example, in the past, we tested IT outages, pandemic outbreaks, hurricanes, or building fires. And with each scenario, we try to pick out certain homework sections that we assign. So examples might be work around downtime procedures when IT's out, cross-training and SOPs for pandemic outbreaks, orders of succession and delegations of authority for hurricanes, and after a building fire, having telework or relocation plans. This continuity test is an opportunity to gather the department's key personnel to discuss the viability of the plan, and as well as make any updates or revisions. The test also is meant to discuss a potential disruption that could challenge the department's ability to provide essential functions to the university. I hate to say fortunate, but we were fortunate that last year, 2016, in the spring, we used the Hurricane Floyd scenario under another name as our continuity plan test for the year. So last year, departments had already reviewed the Floyd scenario, developed plans and procedures in advance of Hurricane Matthew that made landfall last year. Moving forward, the University of North Carolina system has an exercise series coming up this fall called Hurricane Zephyr. The scenario is being developed by FEMA and the National Weather Service as a Category 5 hurricane that makes landfall in North Carolina, impacting all central and eastern universities. So it's our intent during this exercise series coming up in October that we not only review the catastrophic impacts to our campus and how to respond and recover from a Category 5 but how do we continue our operations for a week after, 2 weeks, even a month after the impacts, and then again, that secondary flooding that's to be expected as we receive more hurricanes and tropical storms in the future. So that's all I have for you at this time. I appreciate you having me here to speak today, and please feel free to ask me questions in the chat box or send me an email.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lauren, for sharing your experiences in planning, responding, and learning from Hurricane Matthew at ECU. I think we've all learned a great deal from how well you prepared for this situation. So we have some questions that have come in, but please take this opportunity, attendees, to submit more. Also, feel free to submit a question, even if you want a personal answer. Just note it as private, and we can get back to you directly. Okay, let's get started on our Q&A. So, first question, how many iterations has your checklist gone through, and maybe how accurate was your first version?
Very good. So, as I mentioned, our checklist was started back in 2006 by my previous supervisor, and I started in 2013. So I can really only speak to the time that I've been here. So from the time that I've been here, we've experienced about 6 tropical storms that impacted our university or were near misses for the state. So I'd say about 6 times, and each year I always find something to update our checklist with. The checklist that we'll be sending out today is from 2016, so I haven't yet made those updates from Matthew, into our 2017 checklist. So every time we have an activation of our checklist, it's updated.
Great. How do you account for continuity of research operations in Kuali? What do you do differently?
That's a great question. We haven't had too much done within Kuali. That's definitely one area that we're interested in seeing expanded. We have, through multiple checklists, we have our hurricane checklist, severe storms, and winter storm checklist. And those kind of touch on what to do in the event of an emergency for research labs. We also have a lab safety specialist in our office who's responsible for checking those labs, making sure that they are preparing for a continuity type event. But I can't say that we have those procedures necessarily documented within Kuali at this time, but we're definitely interested in expanding on that.
I'd also like to respond to that as well, letting you know that we currently have a customer advisory group that's working to build out the questionnaire that will be part of the research support. So just a heads up that we realize that's a place for us to improve in our product, and if you're interested in learning some more about that, please speak to me. Okay, next question. In your seasonal hurricane outlook email you sent out, do you track who opened the email, and is this the most effective means of communicating?
We do not track whether or not the emails are opened. It is sent to ECU official, which hits all faculty, staff, and students. So we're hoping that one way or another, if perhaps the person doesn't open it and read it, that another faculty member, another staff, or somebody in the office is sharing that information. And we get good feedback every year. We have some people who respond to those emails saying that they're going to share it with their class, or that maybe they'll have additional questions about how they should prepare. Personally, they'll have personal questions. So I can't speak to how many people are actually reading it. I'm not sure of the effectiveness, but that's a great question.
Okay, what do you think would have been different if this event didn't occur during your fall break on campus?
I don't even know that I can imagine that. It would have been nasty trying to move our students. In the past, ECU has never evacuated campus for a hurricane or tropical storm. And during our Hurricane Zephyr exercise this fall, having a Category 5, we're really going to have to reevaluate at what point do we need to evacuate campus. We're fortunate that Greenville is almost on, I don't want to say a hill, but we are above flood stages, so we essentially become surrounded by water. We call it our moat that ends up developing around the university, which is nice that we're not that impacted by flooding, but it's not so nice that we're cut off from resources, which, you know, we could lose water, power, and our food supply could be impacted. So if this had happened not during fall break, there would have been a lot more discussion about what we needed to do to get these students out of Greenville to relieve our city and county partners so that they weren't taking care of our 22,000 students who were attending schools. Lots of questions there that hopefully will be addressed, if not this hurricane season, definitely during Hurricane Zephyr exercise in October.
Okay. Where were you located during these high impact days? Did you and your team go to campus or work remotely?
Our police station is 24/7, so our police were here on campus. Some of them were housed in residence halls because we didn't consolidate before the storm. We have housing staff that, again, are 24/7 and remained in residence halls to make sure that our students were well taken care of. During the highest impact, most of our staff was home. We're fortunate that a lot of our personnel live within the city limits, so we're less than 5 or 7 miles from the university. I was only 3 miles from the university, but had trouble Sunday morning trying to access campus. I had to go up and around and down, and it was an interesting way to get to campus. I'll say it took me about 3 times longer to get to campus than usual. But most of us did go home overnight and then try to make it back to campus the next day.
Okay. All right, last call for questions. I just have a few more. So if you have something, please chat it. Okay, when using the ECU Matthew hashtag, what were the pros and cons of that experience?
Pros, I would say we got a lot of questions from students. Students seem to be using that medium a lot, but I still don't feel like we got out to as many students as we would have liked through Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So we did get, the questions that we did get were great, and we actually used some of those questions that were coming in with that hashtag to make a frequently asked questions page, because most of them were the same. Being so close to fall break, you're looking at the first exam period, so people were asking about, what about my exam, or they were asking, when can we come back? They were anxious to get back from fall break. So we used a lot of the questions we received on social media through the hashtag to create frequently asked questions page, and that took some of the impact from our call center and lessened that need. I can't say that I really know of a con. It was new for us. That was really the first time that we had created a hashtag for an emergency situation on campus. So I guess it's a learning experience, and we hope next time, we'll handle that a little bit better.
Great. Okay. I think that's us. So a huge thanks to Lauren for your time in preparing and presenting today's webinar. Also, for attendees, this presentation has been recorded and a link to it will be emailed to you. Just note there will also be a post-webinar survey, and in that survey you can request a copy of the hurricane preparation checklist that Lauren had brought up earlier and has created. Thank you so much for attending our webinar, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye.